Good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, Chamath, wonderful to see you here today. Thank you so much for coming.
It's great to be here.
We're driving in while we're from Toronto and flying in from Silicon Valley just a couple of days ago. So the next half hour or so, we like to talk about the amazing opportunities that you're offering Waterloo Engineering students. And that includes the Social Capital Fellows Program for co-op students and the newly expanded palihapitiya-lau Venture Creation Fund. We're also very interested in hearing your thoughts about diversity in engineering and the tech sector, and what makes Waterloo Engineering so unique, and how we can solve the truly difficult problems in our world. And we have left 15 minutes or so for question and answers, because I know the students have a lot of questions for you. So before we do the chat, I'd like to do a proper job introducing you to the audience. Chamath Palihapitiya was born in Sri Lanka. He came to Canada as a young child, and I know he's very smart because he chose Waterloo Engineering for his education. He graduated in electrical engineering in 1999, and it was not all study because he found love with this very lovely lady, Lau. And Bridget is a graduate of the computer engineering program. He worked at an investment bank after school and headed down to Silicon Valley, where we had leadership roles in Mayfield Fund, AOL, and Winamp. Then he found himself in a little one-year-old startup called Facebook. At Facebook, Chamath was a key driver of his success. He was charged with increasing the user base, which as of today tops about 1.7 billion active users. Now that wasn't busy enough for him, so he was also investing in other startups, with many of them which turned out to be very successful. In 2011, Chamath left Facebook to start Social Capital, a venture capital firm with his wife, Bridget. Their mission, I quote, to transform society by using technology to solve the world's hardest problems, by using people and capital to help bring the most promising and disruptive ideas worldwide for maximum impact, unquote. Social capital has been very successful. He has invested in well-known startups, including Slack, Brilliant, Bustle, GetTable, Sprig, SurveyMonkey, and Athos. This year, it was ranked the top VC for having invested in companies with the highest combined probability of Series A to B and from B to C funding. And if you look down that list, there are large VC funds there, and Social Capital is ranked 1. So Chamath was again not busy enough, so he has become the owner and the director of the Golden State Warriors, which were the NBA champions last year.
Year before.
Year before. So any fans of the Warriors, you can see Chamath later about it.
Yeah. Any fans of the Cavs can just leave right now.
That's right. Simply whatever Chamath does, he makes a huge impact. Waterloo Engineering has been extremely fortunate to have his and Bridget's wonderful support. So I want to thank you on behalf of the 62 co-op students you have hired for your portfolio of companies for over the past 2 years, and 45 of them have been Social Capital Fellows, which is a coveted honor. So let's talk about that now. Can you tell us more about the Social Capital program for co-op students, which you launched here in 2014, and specifically, how does one become a Social Capital Fellow, and how would it change a student's life when you do a work term with social fellows?
I think the context of this was my experiences as a co-op. I was in academic probation after 1B. So, I was a person that did reasonably well in high school in my final year. Yeah. Academic probation in year 1. And then I kind of worked my way out, but my work terms were my salvation. I did quite well. And that's where I really started to try to I was like, how do I get an outstanding? How do I get an outstanding? Because that's something that I could get an outstanding. I would go to school, and there were these guys in my class who were going to get 100% no matter what. And so it was clear that I had no chance of being at the top academically, and frankly, I just couldn't be motivated to be that person anyways. But in work, I found a lot of confidence. The problem at the time, though, was like, all the people wanted to have one of two jobs. Was a Microsoft PM or working at a trading floor. Those were like the two most coveted jobs. And at the time, I could understand why. But in hindsight, what I see is that there's, frankly, a lot more opportunity than just limiting people to what is superficially obvious. And so Social Capital Fellows was just a way of jump-starting the ability to bring the best of the Waterloo co-op system down to Silicon Valley, allow them to work across a number of really interesting emerging companies, which they otherwise would not know because, and this is not in any offense to anybody here, but you're not going to have the judgment to know what company is good. And so you're just going to go to the most obvious company. You're going to go to Facebook, you're going to go to Google, which is, I think, okay, but you're just going to be a cog in the wheel. And the problem with that is if you get co-opted mentally to being a cog in the wheel, you'll always be this box checker. And instead, I think what you need to have is an opportunity to be a more important part of a company, which can only happen if the company is quite small. And so in order to overcome the psychological bias of not wanting to, go to Facebook or Google, we had to pay more. And so that's how we said, okay, if we paid more, then everybody else is going to want to come here. And then at least that way we can force you to go to these smaller companies. But by being at these smaller companies, you'll probably realize that that's where you should probably be in the first place. You'll interact with people at a more granular level, you'll have an ability to have more impact, and then you probably have more confidence in thinking that you yourself could be an entrepreneur because you'll see that there's not a lot of romanticism there. So it was a bunch of things that came into the program, and I think a year and a half or 2 years in, I think it's been successful. It's amazing the number of people that have been through it so far, but I think in 10 or 15 years, we will have thousands of people who will have become fellows and have worked at what will have become some of the most interesting companies in the Valley. And I think that's going to have a huge impact.
Great. The topic of diversity, it is getting a lot of attention, especially in the Silicon Valley. Now, here at Engineering Waterloo, we work extremely hard. 10 years ago, the number of female students was less than 12%, for the entire enrollment. This year, for the first time in the history of the faculty, we have nearly 30% of our first-year students are female students. So it takes 10 years to make change. So both you and Bridget are strong supporters of diversity. So what kind of diversity advice would you have for engineers who are just starting out in the career or just launching their first startup?
I mean, look, I'll just take a bigger step back. We are at a point in the world where there has to be a broad set of voices that decide things. And the reason why that's necessary is that in the absence of that, what you have is this foment of anger and frustration. And the reason why that is happening is because there are more people on the outside looking in than are inside at the table making decisions. And that cuts across everything. And so if you just think about sort of how does a society function properly, it's only going to happen when there are people who have a broad set of views and then are forced into a room together to figure out some common ground. That's also true in how you start great companies. It's like you have to sort of find a way to find a commonality in someone that is completely different from you and arbitrate a decision. And so I just don't think this is like a checkbox. It's not a nice to have. It's basically like how anybody really successful ultimately gets to a better place is that they surround themselves with people that push them intellectually and force themselves to confront different ways of thinking. And at least in every successful company that I've seen, they've found a way to do that. So, I would actually say, like, you should, who cares about diversity? I think it's kind of stupid. The whole term is stupid. I think what's not stupid is this idea that you very inherently believe that all people are roughly equal, and that you inherently believe that independent of your economic situation, you may have actually a really good idea. So it can't just be rich people deciding for everybody else. And that you believe that there are things that are worth working on that span not just the most obvious money-making things, but things that are nascent today that could become really important in the future. And that's what I mean by there's a diverse way of thinking. It's an eclecticism in how you surround yourself. It's an open-mindedness to different experiences. So it's not a checkbox. You can't have a person with the role. It's just how you have to live. You know, in Waterloo, the biggest thing that I would say was the thing that I lacked the most was any of that. I had maybe 2 or 3 electives my entire time here. And it's limiting because there's just so much of the world that I didn't understand. And I would not have said that I was as open-minded as I am today. And by having gone to San Francisco, which probably is the most extreme form of open-mindedness possible, I was forced to sort of confront a lot of the biases that I've had. And what I realize is now, the people I surround myself with today are so different than the people I surrounded myself earlier on, and I'm so much better for it. And so there has to be mechanisms where, at a very young age, you kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone. Like, you know, like I remember, like at Waterloo, it's like, you know, there was like all these Indian people, and all they would do is just hang out with each other. And I just found it so stupid. It's like, if I wanted that, my parents should never have left Sri Lanka. I could have been happy as, you know? And it's like, what was the point? And I remember when Bridget and I first started dating, it was just so uncommon because it's like, you have this Asian and a South Asian, and now it's much more common. And so I just think, like, you just have to force yourself into states of discomfort so that you can kind of expose these boundary conditions. Otherwise, you just are emotionally and intellectually stunted. And I think you're never going to achieve your potential that way.
You know, that's the best description of diversity I've heard. And I'm a pretty old lady, you know? So let's talk about another exciting initiative you launched in 2014 here at Waterloo. It's called the palihapitiya-lau Fund, which is available to all 4th-year capstone design students in engineering. It's expanded from ECE. Now it's available to all students in engineering. Now I want to thank you and Bridget again for your generous support, because it's going to make a huge difference for our students with startup aspirations. Now to recap, the Venture Fund is 2 awards. It consists of 2 awards, each $50,000 each, and they're given to 2 capstone teams. And they can use the funds within the first 4 months immediately after the 4B term. So what prompted you and Bridget to offer these awards?
I think the biggest thing that Canada is missing right now is a more broad-based supportive entrepreneurialism. And what's interesting is it has so many ways relative to the United States, so much more potential long-term. It's a much more inclusive, open-minded society. There's a compassion about the future. There's a fairness and an equality that sometimes is lost in the United States. So those boundary conditions should create a much more vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem. But it's just not the case. Most people that want to then start something end up moving to Silicon Valley or end up moving to the US and trying it there. And part of it, again, goes back to the emotional hierarchy that exists is very traditional. It's like, you know, you can't tell your parents, I'm going to drop out of school. You can't tell your parents, I'm moving to, you know, someplace to start a job. And so we wanted to just create a really simple way just to alleviate a lot of that pressure. So if you brand it, all of a sudden you can tell your parents, yeah, I just won this thing, it's 50 grand. And it doesn't matter if it was 50 grand or 5 grand, but the point is now you have permission that allows you to now go and be able to, you know, spend a year working on an idea. And you can do it with this safe harbor. And so a lot of times, like, you don't have to be so super strategic in how you do it. You just have to set it up so that the really simple pressures that prevent you from making these really important decisions in your life, we make emotionally easier for you. So, you know, you can call yourself a social capital fellow, and for all of those people who, you know, would not have been allowed to move down to Silicon Valley because your parents may have wanted you to basically go back to wherever city or town you're on and find the local co-op job and stay there. Now all of a sudden you don't have to do that because you're a fellow, and they'll think, wow, that's a fellow, that must be important, and oh my gosh, you're getting paid more. Similarly, this is the same idea, which is that if you can give people the ability to basically like up-level them away from all this tactical stuff that retards risk-taking, then you have the ability to now be much more open-minded and try stuff. And I think that, look, it's not exactly the most scalable thing in the world, but now you'll have 2 teams of 3 or 4 or 5 people at a time, so, you know, 8 to 10 people a year who take the leap And it doesn't really matter what the output of that is. It's more important the psychological shift that happened in those people's mindsets. And then the next decision becomes that much easier, and then the next decision becomes that much easier. And then if that requires them to push back on what's expected of them, it becomes a little easier. Yeah. And I think that's the most important byproduct.
That's great. You know, I wish I was 23 years old again.
Me too.
You're a very seasoned VC. You really are, and you've done a lot, Chamath. You are truly one of the superstars in the VC world in Silicon Valley. So we want to start digging into you and see whether we can get some hints. What sort of technologies capture your interest, and what are the sectors you feel are the fertile ground for innovation disruption that our students should begin working on?
July 16th, 1968, it's a very important day. All of you people should write it down. That's the day that Intel was founded.
Yes.
And every day since that day has been based on what Intel created, which was this notion of a CPU, CISC, ultimately some RISC-based architecture, but the entire internet, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of value. Everything that's built on top of it, deterministic software, has all been based on this very simple model of computing. If this, then that. While blah, for blah, blah, blah. That's how you write code today. That's how you define any product experience today. Very deterministically. You set a set of experiences. The iPhone, I press this button, this happens. I press that button, then that happens, right? So it's all these very defined, explicit ways of behaving. The problem is that we are now in the midst of completely changing how everything around us works, and we're shifting away from what is very deterministic software to what is more probabilistic software. So what does that mean? So if you've heard of this concept of machine learning or artificial intelligence, what does it all mean? All it really means is we're now writing software that makes decisions, and all of those decisions change over time. The best example of this is if you have either an iPhone or an Android, download Google Photos. It's the most unbelievable example of probabilistic software. Why? You'll keep taking photos, and it's so intelligent. It'll categorize every photo you ever took of a stadium automatically. And not just a sports stadium, but a soccer stadium, a football pitch, when you were seated, when you were actually playing, a stadium, of your kids playing in a gymnasium. Every wine bottle I've ever taken a picture of, all of a sudden gets auto-categorized. And these are all really simple things, but what's happening underneath? Well, it's deciding what's important, and it's changing its ability to do things for you. That's very different than traditional software. So what that means is we're now in the movement to machine learning. So code that changes itself constantly. And so the notion of an application is totally different. How you interact with the internet will be totally different. And it's going to go all the way right back down to the physical chips. And we're going to completely rebuild the computing infrastructure. It is the most fundamentally monumental important shift. It's way more important than mobile. It's way more important than social. All that stuff was very tactical. It will seem very tactical. This is the most important thing. And so I am consumed right now with, okay, there's an entire stack that was basically kicked off by Intel. There will be a completely different stack that will be based around these ideas of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we have to start at the bottom. We have to start literally right at the chipset level and completely redefine how things work. And that's where right now I've been spending most of my time.
Who is building that? I'm curious.
Well, so as an example, you'd be shocked to know that, and I think this is indicative of the future, but if I said to you today, what percentage of, Google's operations, right, are this kind of machine learned versus sort of more traditional deterministic software? And you wouldn't get it right, but most people would say it's like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%, and it's now almost 40% of every single compute that Google generates is this machine learning type of software. And so I think as goes Google, which is frankly 5 or 10 years ahead of everybody.
Yes.
Facebook, Amazon, they're just decades ahead, or a decade ahead. so goes everybody else. Like GE's jet engines now will just be a bunch of sensors, and it will auto reconfigure itself mid-flight based on wind patterns, conditions. It'll dial up and dial down efficiency, all the way down to how, I don't know, Apple decides in one time you'll press the home button and it'll take a picture. The next time you press your home button, it'll actually be home. The third time you press your home button, it'll launch your favorite app because it'll figure it out for you. Right? So that doesn't make sense to you now, but that's the way the world's going to work. So Google's leading the charge, a bunch of other folks, and then there's a handful of us now that have said, okay, we're going to go right back down literally to the bare metal and rebuild the actual processing instruction set modality. So you can't run it on CPUs because there's not enough power in the world, and there's not enough money in the world to buy enough of it, and it's just impossible because it'll take 1 billion years to run even the most simple thing. What's interesting is Google designed their own chipset to be able to do this stuff. 40% of their all compute is this machine learning stuff. It runs on less than 2 or 3% of their CPUs because they completely rebuilt the architecture. And so now that's going to get abstracted for the rest of the world. So that's probably the single most important thing. Machine learning, AI.
That's amazing,
And it has huge implications to society.
Yeah.
Huge implications to society.
It's great. So I think we have time now to have opened the students for questioning. But I do want to ask you this, I'm curious. You graduated in 1999. How do you think your experience here at Waterloo Engineering prepared you for a successful career?
Well, I mean, I'm very unabashed about this, but the smartest people I've ever spent time with were here. Absolutely. And what's amazing is then when you go to the United States and you work beside all these credentialed people from Stanford and Harvard and all these other places, you quickly realize what they just did better than us was they just checked boxes in high school better than we did. That's literally it. And I felt 1,000 times smarter than all those people, and I ran circles around them. And they all work for me now. It's the best. So what's my takeaway? I mean, my takeaway is basically you can focus on being a box checker and live society's definition of what's important. Or you can kind of spend time in places like this that really allow you to surround yourself with truly brilliant people. But the next step is really necessary, which is then you have to then put yourself in a position where you have a supportive environment, an inclusive, open-minded environment to take all different kinds of risk. And some people need a little bit more help than others, and some people need different kinds of help. Some people just need money. Other people need an excuse for their parents, and everything in between. A lot of sort of my philosophy was formed by my personal experiences having been here in that context.
Yes.
I needed more of the latter. I just needed my parents to get off my back.
Yeah.
And not force me to take the most obvious
Don't
path.
we all? Yeah.
And nothing against them, but it's just this is how, especially the immigrant context.
Yes.
That's how a lot of that pressure is defined. So I kind of think now one of the most important things that we can do is sort of figure out where are these other pockets of innovation. And I think that, like I said, I think Canadians in general have all of the precursors. They just need a couple of structural things that really help accelerate it. It should not be the case that in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to necessarily move down to the valley, go to YC, or get funded by us, or me stumble into a couple of entrepreneurs during a fourth-year design project and give them, what is now like $40 or $50 million. That doesn't happen, right? That's too, it's too probabilistically it's just not likely. And so there has to be more structural reforms that make it possible for a broader swath of people.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm in the nanotechnology engineering program. I'm starting a battery company for energy storage in the grid. And I'm going to ask a question that's probably on a lot of people's mind. If we have a really great idea and we know it works, when do you want us trying to contact you, and how do you want us to do that?
I mean, you can do it anytime you think that there's something important. Let me just talk about batteries for a second. So I talked about machine learning and AI. I think that's a huge thing. Another area that I think is absolutely crucial for how the world functions in the future is around climate. And we've started to really dig deep into this area. And the first thing we did was, we actually just announced this in the New York Times, but we we're building a fleet of autonomous seafaring drones, and they're now circumnavigating all the oceans. And the reason why that's important is it has a massive sensor payload inside these drones, and what these drones can do is measure all the surface flux in the oceans, so about 5 to 10 feet above the water, all the way down to 50 feet underneath the water. And if you understand climate, the oceans are heat sink, right? And so all the effects of climate change are trapped in these 65 feet, 60 feet. And if you can measure it, you can build this point cloud that really understands what's going on. And it is scary what's going on. And so then you go to, okay, well, what are the things now that you know that and you can forecast what are some areas that make sense? And I think batteries are one of these really interesting things where whether you talk about large scale, sort of the ability to store energy at higher efficiency, or even at very small practical levels, like, you see this like Samsung Galaxy 7 batteries exploding concept, and you just think to yourself, like, the technology has been so bungling up until now. So I think that, first of all, I would say it's an area that really matters. So it's good that you guys are working on stuff like that. In order for you to really believe you're doing something important, I think you have to have a fundamental innovation that is measurable and that is really defensible. And so if that's the case, then just email me. But I think we have to be able to. You have to know that statement that you just made is beyond hyperbole. So if it's not hyperbolic and it's actually real, then I'll probably give you a couple $1 million before the end of the weekend. But you got to be sure if it's real, because you can only fire that bullet once. So just give me like the 30 seconds. Why do you think it's real?
Right here?
Yeah.
So we just published the paper in Nature Energy, and we've proven the concept. We've built cells, and we know that we can deliver at half the cost of lithium ion, where you can last twice as long, and it's inherently safe, water-based, no risk of fire, no risk of explosion.
And it can be produced at massive scale?
Yeah, so it's made from zinc, which is literally pennies, and then a nanomaterial, all based on.
And that nanomaterial you guys created?
Yeah.
And is that where the value is?
Yeah.
Well, Pearl was just saying that, the acceptance rate this year is basically approaching 10%. What's interesting is actually, if you look at the historical measures of success, if you talk to the publisher of the U.S. News and World Report, he tells this great story, which is that he invented the university ranking system because the magazine was a month and a half away of running out of money. And what they realized was that they needed something in order to sell ads and inventory. And so they invented this list. They came up with this cockamamie measuring system, and they basically ranked all these American universities about 35, 40 years ago. And it really took off and found that people wanted to advertise. And fast forward now, everybody basically tries to jack up their application rates and jam down their acceptance rates so that they can get highly placed on this U.S. News and World Report. And you think, wow, you'd probably think U.S. News and World Report was really strategic about wanting to really add value and insight into the educational system. In fact, it had nothing to do with that. They just wanted to sell an ad to Burger King. And lo and behold, everybody else 40 years later is basically in this rat race trying to get into Harvard. So I think there's two decisions. One is, do we care to play that game? And the reality is you kind of have to at some level, because it's going to be folks like me and eventually some of these folks like you who go off and do good things and do good work and then decide that you should give back meaningfully financially, not just your time, but you need to also, let's just face it, there's no endowment at Waterloo, over our lifetimes, maybe we'll give a couple $100 million to the school, but that's a drop in the bucket. It's meaningless. Harvard's got $27 billion. By the time that, in 40 years, that'll be 60, 70, 80, $100 billion. Stanford will have close to the same. And so I think we're in this place where Waterloo has to make the following decisions. Number one, play the game. Number two, if you're going to play the game, win the game. And so in order to win the game, you basically have to amp up the amount of advertising you do. You have to amp up the ability to pay and just cherry pick great professors. Then you have to find, hopefully, myself and others who do well, who then are forced and compelled to give back a huge amount of money back to the school so that you can then reinvest in all of the things and infrastructure that's required to make this school exceptional. Now, we don't have to be Stanford in the sense that you don't have to have a sprawling campus, Rodin sculptures, NC2A Division I football.
It would be nice. Yeah.
But you don't have to have that.
But
they don't have a quantum research center, we do. They don't do anything in nano, we do. And so there's areas where we can allocate capital in ways that are really intelligent and far-reaching. But it has to be married to functional marketing. And I do think that we have to do it. And I think we have to do a better job. Because it's still not as well known as it should be. It's well known in Silicon Valley. It's well known among tech CEOs because we all secretly know that we all come up here. It's so funny. I was with a bunch of them, and it's like, Jeremy Stoppelman was like, I recruit more engineers from Waterloo. And I'm like, how is Yelp finding a way to get up here? So everybody's up here. And so everybody is strip mining the talent, but there's no closed loop system that then gives credit back to that. Facebook hires more people from here. Like once I started the co-op program at Facebook, it's now more. We hire more people from Waterloo than any other school. Microsoft was hiring more people. Google was hiring more people. That's an amazing testament to the quality, but it doesn't help the brand.
Yeah. And one of the reasons is because all the rankings, QS, Shanghai, they're all based on research, citations, and unless you are a Stanford with a huge research funding, where Stanford is predominantly a graduate school. Their undergraduate program is only a fraction of the graduates. So we have to strengthen our graduate school. So you're going to apply for graduate studies after you finish. Am I right? Sounds good. So I do think that that's what we need to do. We have to really strengthen and build up our graduate school. And I think a lot of it's also medical schools, universities and medical schools tend to rank higher. It's the nature of ranking. And as Chamath is saying, it is the old folks who've been in the system don't want to change the system. And they will remain committed to using the same metrics for ranking. So I think we are top 50 in the world, which is tremendous given that we're still only 60 years, not even barely 60 years old. And Toronto is...
This is probably a top 5 university in the world.
Well, I would say so.
The problem is to close the gap between the perception and what is the reality.
Can we quote that?
5.
Can we quote that?
Well, I would say it's a top 5. I would put IIT. There's probably 1 or 2 of the IITs
Absolutely.
in there.
Delhi is very
So
good,
probably I would put 2 of the IITs. I'd probably put BEDA, us, and some combination of MIT, Stanford. So it's a top 5, 6, 7 school in the world.
Absolutely.
But it has nowhere near the credibility of those other schools.
Yeah.
Not even close. The other thing we have to change is you have to change the financial laws in Canada so that nonprofit universities like Waterloo can still have massive endowments and basically have people contribute back stock or whatever you. And then if that stock is valuable, then it has a way to trap that value and then invest it for the future.
Absolutely.
So it can't just be that if we donate money, it goes into E7. That's good.
Yeah.
We're happy about that.
Yeah.
But being able to invest it in the future, generate a rate of return, use that excess capital. This is these guys have solved this game, so we should play by those rules too.
Well, we have the Educating the Engineer of the Future campaign, and this is exactly what we're trying to deal with. What's the future? 10 years from now, what does engineering look like? What does Waterloo Engineering look like? What does the University of Waterloo look like? You really have to think that far ahead.
Yeah.
There must be more questions. Yes, wow, this is good. All right, your colleague next to you.
Hi, so I'm a graduate student. My name's May.
Good for you.
I'm a systems design engineer doing research in brain-computer interface, and I'm wondering what your opinions on the future of biotechnology and bioengineering.
I'm not sure if you'd consider this, well, the bioengineering I would consider this, but we've spent a bunch of time looking at CRISPR. I think that's CRISPR is basically like gene editing. You can go in and selectively edit out genes and replace them with different kinds of genes, and it just drives a very different, you can perturb your physiology. So if you're sick, you can become unsick. You could grow a third eye. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. Stuff that you would want to do, stuff that you wouldn't want to do, ethically very ambiguous, obviously. So I'm kind of like a little bit of a skeptic, almost because I just think the morality of that is so unclear that I just think it's such a Pandora's box, and I'm just worried about the implications of that. In terms of biotechnology, I actually would go back to this first answer, which is that I think most immediate problems to chronic conditions are going to get solved through a combination of simple hardware and some sort of AI and machine learned way of treating a disease. And I'll give you a very specific example of something that we've been working on. So I started a diabetes company 5 years ago that now, on Tuesday, we just acquired our biggest competitor. And so now we have this basically de facto monopoly where we are the only way that's both FDA cleared as well as cleared in basically every other country in the world to legally extract all of the data that's on your glucometer or glucose, your insulin pump or your CGM. And so if any of you have type 1 diabetes, you know some of these terms, or if you know somebody with type 2, you know that there's all this data that's captured around how people dose and what your blood glucose readings are. So why is this interesting? So for me, I've seen all these efforts to try to build a smart pancreas, and it never made any sense to me. Like, why would you create a highly complicated biological system like that artificially and then try to put it inside your body? That's, to me, it's crazy. It's way more difficult than it has to be. Instead, the solution, in my opinion, was if you get enough data, you'll be able to machine learn how exactly to dose and titrate and bolus specifically for you. And so now, because we acquired this business now, we have literally billions and billions of longitudinal data points across millions of patients across how they deal with their diabetes. And so what we can now do is machine learn a way to reactively, in real time, treat you, titrate you, dose you. And that is now just basically a set of algorithms that talk to a little cell phone chip in your next generation CGM or insulin pump or what have you. So to me, like biotechnology, if I think about like what are the long-term solutions, I'm very excited about the combination of very simple technology like this. So these things are already built, they're already proliferated at scale. There's no point trying to re-engineer them for complexity, but marrying them to stuff that sits in the cloud, that's highly sophisticated, that's based on massive amounts of populational data, can allow you to do things that are miraculous. So like my dad died of diabetes, but he really shouldn't, because what should have happened is that if he's progressing, then what really should have happened was, there's a little cell phone chip, and his CGM or his insulin pump can basically speak to something in the cloud, and that cloud is our smart pancreas, and all it is basically reacting to his physiology in real time and just perfectly titrating and dosing. And then it just stops the progression of diabetes in its track, as an example. But you can take that and you can extend that to emphysema, asthma, cancer. So to me, that's the future. Massive amounts of data in the cloud, plus very, very simple physical technology that interfaces to people. But I think it's a really interesting area. It's not stuff that we do a lot of just because it's so regulatorily burdensome, and it's super expensive.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the fear is it's just like all of a sudden you just get judged to be a total failure. But you're right, it's not like the Globe and Mail publishes a list of like, here's our loser list for 2016. Here are all the people that tried and failed, and so if you see them, punch them in the face. Nobody says that, right? And so this is what I'm saying. It's like there's all this burden, psychological burden around failure, which is self-inflicted. But you're right. There is no way to, like, nobody actually looks to put you down. And so it's you really internalizing that that's actually true. And as a result, there is literally nothing to lose. There's nothing to lose. All you end up doing is self-actualizing. I mean, it's crazy. Like, it's like it's like this is like psychological first principles. And I'm not saying that part's easy. Because then you have to basically remind yourself of that every day, because then you have all these other people who are like, oh, I have a job at Deloitte and look at my condo. And you're like, oh, I'm still poor. So I get it. But you have to see past the superficiality of those decisions. And I'm not saying that those are easy either. Like I was in a horrible financial state. I grew up on welfare my whole life, and so I was not in a position where I could not make that decision initially. And when I went to Nesbitt Burns, I was taking a job for money. And so I did it, and then when I quit, it was a real punch in the gut for our family, because I was the oldest kid, and I was the one paying for everything. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but I didn't have much to lose, actually.
So in retrospect, would you have not gone there?
No, I think everybody has to have a set of experiences that get them to that point, and everybody's time horizon will be different. Mark can drop out of Harvard. I mean, think of how hard it is for you to drop out of Harvard. That's way harder than dropping out of, I don't know, San Jose State, I must imagine, right? Or Laurier, I mean, It's Harvard, you know, or Waterloo. Like it's like dropping out of Waterloo is hard, right? So he got there really early. He got there when he was 18 years old. I got to my point in life when I could make a decision like that at 23 years old. Some people make that decision at 38 years old. I think more the question is, are you giving yourself a chance to be introspective enough to get to that place in your life where you're willing to take a shot and work for yourself, do the things that you like, independent of how people judge you? That's a big deal. No matter however that manifests in whatever you end up doing. And that's what I mean by box checking. It's, I mean, like the right answer, I was listening to this podcast. There was a woman who was telling this story about how she was sent to Catholic school, first day, grade 1. She's like, oh my God, don't ever send me to Catholic school. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to read what I want to read, etc. And the story goes full circle where she ends up teaching first grade in Catholic school, falls in love with that whole process, ends up becoming a nun, and then lives out her entire life in this whole thing. And what was amazing to me is like you can make all kinds of decisions that seem box checking, but for her that was not box checking. That was living her truth. For other people, being a teacher may be box checking. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not the superficial manifestation of what you do. It's how you got to that decision.
Hi, I'm Rishi. I'm in computer engineering 1A. I was just wondering if you have any advice for first-year ECE students.
Yeah, year 1 really kicked my ass. But it was a really important thing for me because I was forced to confront the fact that I was by no means academically the smartest person, which was important because I had always loafed around through high school thinking, even though I don't have the best marks, I'm pretty sure I could get them. Here I realize I am not going to get them, nor am I the smartest. And so you had to find a different way of getting confidence. So, and then I would pick your work terms really wisely. I mean, we've had some amazing people in like 1B apply and like were fellows and then end up in like the most like odd situations, and it's just like, and like you see these people and you're like, how did a first year end up getting these jobs? But because it's so meritocratic, you know, they're running circles around some of these 3Bs and 4As and whatever, and it's pretty cool to see. So I would say pick your co-op term wisely as well. We had this great guy, by the way, who was a fellow. I don't remember what term it was in. Maybe he was like a second year. Was a fellow, worked at Slack like very early on, like 2014, I think, Slack, through us. Worked there for a couple more terms. He crushed it. He got an outstanding. They gave him equity. Came back here with equity in Slack in 2014. Graduated, and is now back at Slack. How sick is that? That's unbelievable.
That's an amazing program. So keep an eye on it.
It's unbelievable. I mean, if you had asked Mark what he thought Facebook would be, he would have gotten it totally wrong. So I think there's an honesty here that there's a lot of luck that was between finding literally a version of a Facebook, which was a product in US colleges, to now this global force that unites the world. And so what I mean by this is like this idea that all of a sudden at such a super young age you have a sense of all of this stuff is kind of bullshit. And it's hindsight, and it's romanticizing something that was frankly a lot of serendipity. Why that's important is right now I think the culture, particularly in Silicon Valley, is so mercenary around talent and people. People hopscotch from job to job. They try to get every single little checkbox they can. That it's a very dangerous time in many ways because you're much better off gaining some sort of perspective. That's not a function of time, but it's a function of experience. I look back at the years that I spent at AOL, which were quite frustrating if you thought about it, because here I am languishing at a place like AOL. Well, my friends are working at Google and this and that, and it's all working, and nothing that we were doing was working, and they had equity, and we had worthless, and so, but I got real experience, and I refined a point of view, and I really think like, why can I do what I do? It's because I have a extremely precise and very specific and unique worldview. And I got that through those experiences. So I think the idea of being a founder is kind of like, that's not the goal. It's the byproduct of a point of view. And then the question is, how do you get to a unique point of view? And you get it through experience. And you can have them in totally different ways. And so this is why I'm saying, like, I think there's the superficial manifestation. Like, the notion of being a founder today is like what yesterday you would have said is like the notion of going and getting an MBA. It's just bullshit. It doesn't mean anything. So there's either like, you're either have really invented a really unique nanomaterial, or you're bullshitting. Do you know what I'm saying? You either are really capable of designing something really clever, or you're bullshitting. You're either really gaining a perspective because you're doing something super interesting at a smaller company, but you care about what they're doing, or you just go back to Facebook, or you're bullshitting. You know, like, so you gotta, this is like, again, I just, like, your entire life is gonna be based on this idea of introspection, self-actualization, and just like blocking out the outside in noise. Everybody is trying to put you in a box. Every single person is trying to figure out a little way of just attaching a little label to you so that you become incrementally more predictable to them. And so you have to find a set of experiences that allow you to push back against that. And so you should focus on those. That'll come through your friends, which is why you need to have an eclectic group of friends. By the time you spend here, where you go to work, having the courage to do things that are a little uncomfortable for you, force you to push back on the societal infrastructure that's telling you to do the opposite. That's what you need to be doing. That's the roadmap. And then the output of that will be all the other stuff that is superficial around it. Maybe you do start a company. Maybe you join a company. And then you start a company. Who cares? Those are manifestations. Those are byproducts of a path. And you got to find your own path and have the confidence to stick to it.